I noticed the light first, how it broke against the rows of wine glasses like small rehearsed explosions. Every surface in the reception hall shimmered. Someone must have spent days polishing all that glassware, though it still wasn't enough to distract me from the sour-sweet scent of roasted garlic drifting from the kitchen doors only a few feet away. The hinges let out a soft metallic cry each time a server pushed through carrying. When the usher guided me toward the far corner, I thought there'd been a mistake. I even opened my palm like I wanted to stop him, just a small gesture, a reflex, but he kept walking, motioning me along. We passed tables dressed in white linen and eucalyptus garlands, and guests who had the kind of posture you learn when you grow up knowing you'll always be seated in the center of the room. Laughter bounced between Che, my son's Tayo. The usher stopped at a round table, tucked close enough to the Iu's swinging double doors that every gust of movement stirred the hem of the tablecloth. A group of people I barely recognized, one of my ex-wife's cousins, two neighbors of the bride's family, and an elderly man who looked like he'd wandered in from a park bench, glanced up at me with polite confusion. "This was the table you give to?" I managed a smile. My chest felt too tight for the gesture, but it stretched across my face anyway. The old habit kicked in. My fingers drifted to the ring I no longer wore, just circling the phantom band, a ghost of gold that still lived on my skin. Here, table 19, even the number felt like a shrug. I lowered myself into the chair carefully, as though the wrong movement might shatter the fragile balance I was trying to keep between pride and disappointment. From here, the music was muffled by chatter and the clatter of dishes being stacked behind the doors. Every few seconds they swung open just wide enough for a slice of blistering kitchen light to cut across the floor, bright and sterile. I looked toward the head table, where my son, my only child, would sit with his new bride. Their seats were angled to face the entire room. They would see everyone, except maybe me, tucked back here behind the rhythm of kitchen doors opening and closing. I tried not to take it personally. I'd been practicing that for years. My son Evan hadn't always kept me at arm's length. When he was little, he had this habit of hanging onto my shirt like I was a lifeline. He'd do it in grocery stores, in parking lots, in places where the world grew too big too fast. When he turned 5, we built a fort out of couch cushions and the old blanket with red stitching that my mother made before she passed. Inside that fort, he told me he wanted to be a man like you, quiet, steady. I'd held on to that sentence for years longer than he probably remembered saying it. But the divorce changed things. It carved a canyon between us that none of my weekend visits or birthday calls could fill. His mother remarried someone with a marbled kitchen island, a boat, the kind of laugh you hear in business commercials. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment on the east side of town. I told myself kids are resilient, that Evan would understand one day. Still, every time I dropped him off and watched him walk up the driveway toward that bigger, brighter house, something inside me sagged. I made mistakes too. Being quiet isn't the same as being present, and sometimes I think I hid behind my calm voice because I didn't know how to fight for the life that was slipping away. Evan grew up. He started calling me Dad only on birthdays and holidays. Now he was 23, getting married to a woman from a family so wealthy their name alone made people stand straighter. I was proud of him. I truly was. Even here, seated next to the kitchen, pride glowed inside me like a candle with a stubborn flame. But shame has a way of leaning in close. As the guests filled their seats, the contrast became impossible to ignore. The bride's family entered the hall like a parade of tailored suits and sparkling dresses. Voices carried easily. People laughed loudly. A man at the next table boasted about a vineyard he owned. A woman lifted her cardigan to show a bracelet worth more than my car. Meanwhile, I worked at a local auto shop. Decent, steady work, the kind that kept your hands rough and your paycheck small. My apartment was modest, A second-hand sofa, a window that leaked cold air in the winter, a coffee maker that needed 2 attempts to brew anything. I'd brought a simple envelope with a check inside as a wedding gift. I felt the thinness of it now, like paper could be embarrassed. The kitchen door swung open again, slapping steam into the air. Someone laughed at the next table. A champagne cork popped. I rubbed the bare place on my finger where my ring used to sit. This was still my son's wedding, and I would stay even if no one noticed. The reception had a rhythm, one I felt more than heard. Silverware chimed against plates, glass stems clicked lightly, and the band on stage played a jazz arrangement so smooth it slid under everything like warm water. From table 19, the music felt distant, filtered through laughter and the persistent thought of kitchen trays being stacked. I kept searching for Evan every time I spotted him shaking hands, hugging relatives, smiling the polite smile you master when you host an event too big for your own comfort. Dished, I felt something inside me lift, then sink again. We hadn't spoken yet. I didn't want to pull him away from anyone. I never wanted to be the person who demanded space he didn't naturally give. A server passed behind me with a tray of scallops crackling in a glaze. The smell was rich and buttery. He muttered behind as he squeezed past, his elbow brushing my chair. I straightened instinctively, like I needed to make myself smaller to fit here. Across the room, the bride's family occupied an entire cluster of tables near the dance floor, centered, spotlighted, golden. Men in dark suits moved with the ease of people who had long ago learned the choreography of influence. Women glimmered with jewelry that caught the light every time they turned their heads. Their laughter rose above the music without effort. At the head table, Avon sat beside Hannah, his new wife, her white dress cascading around her like a spill of moonlight. Her father stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder as he spoke to a group of guests. I didn't know much about the man except that he owned several companies and fields of investments I didn't understand. He had the sort of presence that seemed to expand whatever room he stood in. They called him Robert Mercer. It wasn't a name people said casually. It was a name with punctuation. Robert Mercer, pause, the man with 50-something million in assets, depending on who was counting. The music faded slightly as the band changed songs. A host tapped a microphone near the stage, sending mild feedback across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we'll begin toast shortly. Please take your seats." People drifted back to their tables in bright, swirling patterns, sequins winking, high heels tapping, the murmur of contented guests growing and settling like a great animal circling before rest. I lowered myself into my chair again, gently, as if trying not to creak. The kitchen door slammed open behind me, and a server hurried out with a tray of water glasses. The noise startled me. My hand instinctively went to the place where my ring used to be. When the room quieted, the host continued, "Our first toast tonight will be from the father of the bride, Robert Mercer." Applause erupted, genuine, enthusiastic, the kind that swells quickly and fills the space. I clapped too, though mine felt like a softer echo of everyone else's. Robert rose from his seat like someone stepping into a spotlight he'd been waiting for. He was tall, with graying temples that made him look distinguished rather than old. His suit was the kind of black that seemed deeper than fabric, like it absorbed color. He walked to the stage with a steady, practiced stride. He took the microphone, smiling at the crowd. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice warm but commanding. "It's not every day you get to watch your daughter marry a man who makes her genuinely happy." People murmured approvingly. Evan looked down shyly. Hannah beamed up at her father. "I've spent my life building things," Robert continued, "companies, partnerships, investments, but nothing has ever been more important to me than my family." Applause again. Cameras flashed from various tables. He let the moment breathe before he spoke again. And because of that, I want tonight to be not just a celebration, but a declaration. A declaration? Around me, people leaned forward slightly. Robert's expression changed, subtle but deliberate. Many of you know that I've spent years planning my estate, what will happen to my assets when I'm gone. I've talked to some of you about it already, though not all. I frowned. Estate? At a wedding. A hum of confusion moved through the room like a low wind. He continued. Tonight feels like the right time to make an announcement, since my family has grown by one very important member. He gestured toward Evan. My son straightened, startled. My heart thudded in my chest. Robert said, as of next week, my updated will currently valued at $54 million will be finalized. Chairs scraped. Someone gasped. Conversation jolted to life in tiny electric bursts. 54 million, the man at my table whispered, stunned. My God. Robert raised a hand and the room, unbelievably, fell silent. My will contains conditions, he said, strict but fair, and they concern not only my daughter but also her new husband and, by extension, both of our families. A ripple of tension slid through the air. My breath slowed, but my heartbeat didn't. Effective immediately, Robert went on, the inheritance for my daughter and her husband will depend on 3 requirements. He held up a finger. 1, they must live in the city, not the suburbs, not across the country. Here, near family. Another finger. 2, they must work together, whether in business or service, to build something meaningful, something sustainable. I will not leave my legacy to idleness. A third. And 3, they must maintain strong, active relationships with both sides of the family. Murmurs rose, some impressed, some incredulous. Robert pressed on. This means holidays, birthdays, shared decisions, no estrangement, no drifting apart. Family unity is not optional, it is mandatory. My hands tightened around the edge of the table. People were glancing at me now, whispering. I felt my chest squeeze. But, Robert added, if any of these conditions are not met by either partner, the inheritance will be forfeited entirely. Someone gasped so loudly it broke the silence clean in half. Evan looked pale. Hannah shifted uncomfortably. And me? I felt a coldness move through me, slow and deep, because the third condition, maintaining strong, active relationships with both sides of the family, had weight. Weight that leaned directly on me. Me, who lived in a cramped apartment. Me, who barely received returned texts. Me, who was seated near the kitchen at his own son's wedding. Robert looked out over the room as if expecting applause. Instead, everyone stood. Half the guests surged upward instinctively, some to get a better view, some murmuring to one another in disbelief, others rising out of pure tension. The room felt unbalanced, as though the floor tilted slightly. And in that swell of movement and surprise, I understood something sharply. I was the only one who didn't know this was coming. A hollow feeling opened in my stomach, wide and echoing. The applause finally came, tentative, scattered, then growing, but it washed right past me, because as the room celebrated its shock, I sat frozen at table 19, beside the kitchen doors, with the distinct sensation that I had just become a problem in my son's life, a condition, a requirement, a potential liability. And for the first time that day, the weight of being invisible felt like a relief. At least no one could see my face. The applause eventually died down, but the unrest didn't. It simply changed, shape splintering into whispers, sideways glances, and tight, uneasy laughter. It reminded me of the aftermath of a small earthquake, the room still standing, but everyone wondering what invisible cracks had formed beneath their feet. The kitchen doors behind me burst open again, releasing a wave of heat and the bitter scent of seared onions. A server hurried past, nearly bumping my chair. I murmured, "Sorry," even though he was the one who clipped me. Old habits. Make yourself smaller. Make yourself invisible. Make yourself convenient. People surged toward the head table. The bride's relatives clustered like birds startled into flight, talking quickly, hands fluttering. A few of the older guests retreated into corners to debate the fairness of the announcement. I heard words like unprecedented, conditional love, motives, power play. But the loudest whispers came from the tables closest to me, because the guests who didn't know me, and even some who vaguely did, were speculating aloud about the third condition, about my role in it. That's going to be the tricky part. A woman at my table said, leaning toward the man beside her. She didn't bother lowering her voice. The father, the man asked, divorced, right? Lives. Where does he live again? Some apartment, she said. Very modest. Evan practically grew up at his stepfather's house. The man clicked his tongue sympathetically. And that is who Robert is linking to the inheritance? Seems complicated. Complicated. That word landed like a stone in my stomach. I fiddled with the empty space on my finger again, the phantom wedding band warming under my touch even though it wasn't really there. I stared at my hands until the voices felt muted, like I was sinking underwater. The host announced that dinner service would resume shortly, but no one sat down. Not really. People perched on their chairs like birds ready to take flight at the next loud sound. Others hovered near the aisle, whispering with the intensity of a board meeting. The bride's relatives seemed torn between indignation and pride. The grooms sighed. What little of it existed beyond my ex-wife's circle looked confused and mildly alarmed. And me? I sat still. I didn't know how not to. The man next to me gave me a sympathetic smile, the first warmth I'd received since arriving. Must be quite something for you, he said gently. Quite a surprise. I nodded, my throat tight. Yes, it certainly was. And your son, did he know? He asked, lowering his voice. I don't think so, I said, not this part. Not the part where his father, already the least impressive presence in the room, had suddenly become a pillar the inheritance leaned upon. Not the part where any distance between us might cost him millions. The thought made a sound in my head like something cracking. After several minutes, servers began delivering plates of salad, trying to restore order with routine. The chaos dulled, but tension hummed beneath every fork lifted. A woman at the next table glanced at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as a guest, but as a variable. So you're the father? She asked, leaning slightly toward me. I nodded, offering a polite smile. She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Well, I suppose you'll be seeing quite a lot of them now, won't you? Her eyes gleamed with something I couldn't read: curiosity, condescension, pity, family unity, she added, quoting the will with a dramatic little smile. I swallowed. If they want that, I said quietly. Oh, I think they will, she replied. 54 million reasons to. I wished she hadn't said that. Not because it shattered an illusion. I had no illusions about where I stood, but because it underlined something I'd feared for years. What if Evan needed me now, not because he wanted me, but because I was required? I felt my heart falter. A sense of shame crept up my spine, tightening every vertebra. I'd spent years learning how to accept the distance between us, how to soften it with monthly messages, with patience, with small acts of hope. But this felt like a knife being handed to him with my name engraved on the handle. He could cut me out, or hold on to me, and whatever he chose, I would feel it like a wound. The salad in front of me went untouched. The bride's family didn't waste time. Within minutes, small knots of relatives surrounded Robert Mercer, gesturing sharply, their voices low but intense. Even from across the room, I could sense their agitation, sharp hand movements, tight jaws, a few pointed looks in my direction. My ex-wife stood nearby, whispering to her husband. She didn't look angry, just concerned. Concern, I realized, was worse. Anger has ages you can address. Concern comes with the quiet assumption that you can't handle what's happening. Evan and Hannah had moved slightly aside from the chaos, speaking in rapid, hushed tones. She looked anxious, her fingers twisting the fabric of her dress. Evan's expression was tight, uncertain, like a man standing at the edge of a cliff he didn't realize he'd been walking toward. He glanced toward me, just once, a quick flickering glance. Our eyes met. He's held something that wasn't anger or disappointment. It was fear, not fear of me, fear for what this meant. Then, just as quickly, he looked away as another group of guests swarmed him with questions. At table 19, the speculation grew thicker. How will the couple balance everything? Can they really be expected to juggle both families? And what about the father, James, right? I felt heat rise at the sound of my name, spoken as if I were a logistical problem. I mean, a man near me continued, it's one thing to mandate closeness with the family you actually see, but what about, you know, he gestured vaguely in my direction without even turning. I stiffened. You know that side. That side. I was a side now, a direction, not a person. The word stung, not deeply, but in that slow, creeping way that builds into something serrated over time. I wanted to leave the table, to stand, to breathe air that wasn't thick with judgment and million-dollar expectations. But every time I tried to shift, a server walked past or someone from another table glanced over and I sank back down. Movement caught my eye. A young woman, maybe a cousin from Hannah's family, approached me with a kind smile. Hi, she said softly. I just wanted to say, this must feel overwhelming. I nodded, relieved by the gentleness in her tone. It's just a lot, you know, she continued. The conditions, the expectations, all the eyes on everyone. Her empathy was a balm I didn't know I needed. But especially on you, she added. People will expect things from you now. I swallowed. I know. And not all of it will be fair. That surprised me. You think so? She nodded. Some people think wealth gives them the right to orchestrate other people's lives. I let out a breath, almost a laugh. I suppose today proved that. She smiled, but with sadness. If this were my wedding, I'd want genuine relationships, not forced ones. I hope your son knows the difference. Her words lingered as she left. Genuine relationships. I'd spent years trying to offer exactly that quietly, steadily, even when it hurt. Now that quietness felt like both my strength and my vulnerability. The tension simmered through dinner. People ate mechanically, speaking in clipped, charged sentences. Every few minutes I felt eyes on me, evaluating, measuring, speculating. In the clatter of forks and murmurs, a new fear unfolded inside me. What if maintaining a relationship wasn't the real test? What if the real test was whether Evan could reconcile two worlds that had never fit together and never would? The thought settled heavily on my chest. I had become part of a financial equation I never asked to be in, and I had the sinking sense that things were about to break open in ways none of us were prepared for. I didn't see Evan approach, only felt a shift in the room's air, like someone had opened a door behind me. When I looked up, he was standing beside my chair, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. It was the posture he used as a kid when he didn't know how to start a difficult sentence. Dad, he said quietly. The word Dad hit me in the chest harder than anything Robert Mercer had said that evening. I stood slowly, unsure whether to hug him or stay still, not wanting to crowd him. He solved the dilemma by stepping closer, arms halfway open, a gesture I met gratefully. The hug was brief but real. His breath trembled just slightly against my shoulder. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Of course," I said, my voice soft. We moved to a quieter corner near a floral arrangement, out of the main current of guests. From here the chatter became background noise, like a distant tide. The light was dimmer, catching on the edges of his suit, giving him a faint halo that made him look younger than he was. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I didn't know he was going to do that, I swear." "I believe you," I said. "It was supposed to be a toast about family and gratitude. That's what he told us. Not—" He gestured helplessly toward the space where his father-in-law had spoken. "Not a legal announcement." I nodded. He blindsided all of us. He glanced up sharply. "Especially you, and I'm really sorry for that." Hearing my son apologize to me on his wedding day felt strange, like the world had tilted a degree. I reached out and rested a hand briefly on his arm. "You don't have anything to apologize for." He swallowed. "Dad, you heard the conditions." I did. "And the third one." "I know." We stood there for several seconds, silence stretching, but not empty. More like a rope pulled taut between two ends that hadn't been connected in years. Evan exhaled slowly. "He means well in his own misguided way. He thinks structure equals protection." "Structure can turn into cages," I said before I could soften the words. Evan looked at me, surprised and maybe a little relieved someone else had said it. "I don't want you to think," he said, voice tightening, "that our relationship is some kind of requirement now, or an obligation." I frowned. "What do you think I'm thinking?" "I don't know." His eyes dropped to the floor. "That maybe you'll feel like I only want you around for the money, or because of the will." A small sting hit me, not from what he said, but from the fact that it was plausible to him. "Evan," I said gently, "I've never believed your love was tied to anything. Not money, not conditions." He nodded, but didn't look relieved. "Still, I'm scared, Dad." "Of losing the inheritance?" I asked. His eyes snapped up, pained. "No, of losing you." The words landed so unexpectedly that I had to take a breath. More than anything, that was what I'd secretly wanted to hear for years and what I'd convinced myself I'd never hear again. Before I could answer, someone called his name sharply. Hannah. She approached in a hurry, her dress trembling with each step, her face pale beneath the soft makeup. "Evan, your father wants to speak with you," she said breathlessly. Then she glanced at me. "Yeah, both of you, actually." I blinked. "Me?" "Yes." She hesitated, then added softly, "Please come. It's important." Evan gently took her hand. "We're coming." Robert Mercer was waiting near the bar, surrounded by a semicircle of relatives who didn't bother hiding their anxiety. When he saw us, he dismissed the others with a subtle wave of authority, not rude, but firm. "James," he said, nodding at me. His tone carried the practiced politeness of a man acknowledging an employee rather than a peer. "Thank you for joining us." I felt myself straighten unconsciously. "What did you need to speak about?" He gestured toward a quieter alcove near the windows. "This way." We followed him. The view outside showed the dark city skyline, dotted with lights like scattered stars. For a moment I felt suspended between two worlds, the grounded one outside and the charged one inside. Robert turned to face us, clasping his hands in front of him. "I want to clarify the announcement," he began. "There seems to be confusion." Hannah bristled. "You made it sound like an ultimatum." He didn't flinch. "Because it is." Evan stepped closer, tension hardening his voice. "Dad, this is our wedding, not a boardroom." "I'm aware," Robert said, "but this is also the moment when our families merge. Transparency is essential." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. James, your role in this is significant. My throat tightened. My role? Yes. He nodded briskly. The third condition requires that both families both stay integrated. No estrangement, no distance, no drifting apart. His gaze lingered on me as he said distance. I stiffened. Are you insinuating something? I'm acknowledging reality, he said evenly. You and Evan have not been close, and I have concerns. Something hot and immediate flared in my chest. Concerns? That Evan might forgive the bluntness lose motivation to maintain the relationship, or that old patterns might reemerge. My daughter's future depends on familial unity, emotional consistency, stability. My jaw clenched. You think I'm unstable? He raised a hand. Not at all, but I cannot risk leaving $54 million at the mercy of unresolved family dynamics. Evan stepped forward sharply. Dad, that's enough. Robert ignored him. James, he continued, I'm asking, I know, expecting you to commit, to be present, regularly, predictably. Not out of obligation, but out of responsibility, for Evan, for Hannah, for the future we are all now part of. It wasn't a request, it was a command cloaked in civility. I took a breath slow, steady, because if I didn't, I might have said something I'd regret. Robert, I said carefully, I have always tried to be in my son's life, even when circumstances made it difficult. I don't respond well to being ordered to be a father. I already am one. He looked almost bored. Intentions are irrelevant. Outcomes matter. The words hit like a slap. Hannah's voice broke unexpectedly. Dad, please, stop turning this into a transaction. Robert looked startled, as if he hadn't expected resistance from his daughter. I'm not turning it into anything, he said. I'm safeguarding the legacy I've spent decades building. Evan's shoulders tensed. At the cost of ours? Silence. Sharp, chilling silence. Then Robert's gaze returned to me, assessing. Almost clinical. James, you must decide tonight whether you are willing to take your role seriously. I blinked. Tonight? Yes, he said simply. This isn't a casual matter. Something inside me tightened so sharply it almost hurt. I won't, I said quietly. Robert frowned. You won't what? I won't decide my relationship with my son based on your inheritance. He stared at me, eyes narrowing slightly. Then you may cost him everything. Evan's voice cracked. Dad, stop. Robert continued, unyielding. $54 million, James. Stability, security, opportunity. But if you cannot commit to fulfilling your end... My end, I repeated, incredulous. Yes, he said. Your end of the family. My breath shook, not out of fear, out of anger. Controlled, focused anger that felt entirely foreign to me. Before I could speak, a voice cut through the tension. You're painting the wrong villain, Robert. We all turned. A man older stooped slightly, but with sharp eyes stepped forward from behind a column. I recognized him vaguely from earlier, one of the Mercer uncles. He looked at me and nodded gently. Then he turned to Robert. You never told them the real reason behind those conditions, he said quietly. Robert's face froze. Hannah's eyes widened. What reason? Ish. The older man's gaze swept over the three of us before settling heavily on Robert. Tell them, he said, or I will. The room behind us hummed with music and laughter, but here, in this dim alcove by the windows, everything went still. So still I could hear my own heartbeat. Something was about to break open, and I had no idea what was coming next. I didn't see the father-in-law collapse at first. What I saw was my son's face pale, jaw locked right before someone screamed. The microphone hit the floor with a crack. Gerald, impossibly controlled, immaculately composed, Gerald staggered forward like someone had reached into his ribs and twisted. His right hand clutched the edge of the head table, dragging a wine glass with him. It shattered, spraying red across the white linen like an accusation. Then he went down. A shudder ran through the room, a collective intake of breath, a ripple of dresses and suits as chairs scraped back. I stood too quickly, and my knee hit the edge of the table. The shock barely registered. All I saw was the circle forming around him. For a moment, I stayed where I was. My old instinct. Don't get in the way. Don't make things worse. Don't pretend you belong somewhere you don't. Someone shouted for a doctor. Someone else cried. 100 people seemed to move at once. But my son, Adam, was frozen. He just stood there, staring at the man who'd spent a year turning him into a project, a successor, a legacy container, the man who just publicly tied his marriage, his future, his sense of self, to a fortune he hadn't asked for. Adam looked numb, and something in me, something long dormant, pushed up from underneath the layers of quiet habit and self-erasure, move. I slipped between people and reached Gerald before most could kneel. Not because I knew what I was doing, I didn't, but because I could see the panic rising like steam. His chest was rising shallowly, his eyes half open but unfocused. There was blood from a cut on his palm, thin as thread. "Give him space," I murmured, surprised at how steady my own voice sounded. "He's breathing. Don't crowd him." Someone listened, then someone else. A small ring of calm opened. "Dad?" Adam's voice cracked. "He's conscious," I said. Gerald blinked at me, not with gratitude, but recognition, like he'd forgotten I existed until that second. Then his fingers twitched, trying to grip my sleeve. His voice was barely audible. "The folder," he whispered. I leaned closer. "What folder?" He swallowed hard, lips dry, breath uneven. "In my jacket, inside pocket." I hesitated, not because I feared invading his privacy, but because it felt like the kind of moment where the world splits and the version you choose to follow determines everything that comes after. But Adam was staring at me with a strange mixture of fear and implicit trust. So I reached into Gerald's tuxedo jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope, thick, heavy, creased like it had been touched too often. My name wasn't on it. Neither was my son's, only one word. "Read." Gerald closed his eyes as if relieved. Not saved, just relieved. The paramedics arrived seconds later, pushing me aside gently. I stepped back, envelope still in my hand, pulse in my throat. People whispered about the collapse, the will, the scene, the spectacle, but their voices were distant, like echoes across water. All my attention narrowed to the weight of that envelope. My son came up beside me. "What is that?" he asked, voice raw. "I don't know." "Did he give it to you?" "He tried to." I met Adam's eyes. "I think he wanted you to have it." Adam swallowed. "Open it." "We should wait. Until we know he's stable." "No," Adam said with a steadiness that didn't match the tremor in his hands. "I can't wait anymore. I'm done being told things after the fact." He looked so much like the boy who used to stand outside his bedroom door, gathering courage, to ask me if I was leaving again after the divorce. The same mixture of anger, fear, hope. I tore the envelope. Inside was a letter handwritten, uneven, rushed. I read the first line and felt the world shift under my feet, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest, and because it wasn't addressed to Adam at all. It was addressed to me. "James, I need to explain what I've done, and what I failed to do, before it's too late." Adam exhaled sharply. "What the hell?" My throat tightened. Around us, the reception hall buzzed with confusion and movement, but the two of us stood still, the letter trembling between us. "Do you want me to keep going?" I asked. Adam nodded, jaw set. "Read it, please." So I did. And the next lines changed everything we thought we understood about that night, the inheritance, the drama, and the quiet war Gerald had been fighting long before we arrived. The paramedics wheeled Gerald out before I finished reading the letter. The door swung shut behind them, leaving a wake of murmurs and shaken guests. Adam and I stood off to the side in the same corner where I'd spent most of the evening trying to disappear. Funny how a place can change its meaning in half an hour. I reread the last lines silently before handing the letter to my son. Gerald's handwriting trembled across the page. I built a legacy on fear. I thought control was love. I tied my daughter's future to money because I didn't trust myself to give her anything else. But I never wanted them to inherit my anxieties. The conditions in the will, they were never meant to shape his choices, only to scare the people who tried to control hers. If I made a spectacle tonight, it's because I panicked. I saw myself becoming the villain in both their lives. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him he deserves better from all of us. Adam folded the letter very slowly, his chest rising and falling like he was trying to breathe around something pressing inward. "He wrote this before the toast?" he asked. "Yes." So he knew he was wrong. He knew he shouldn't have done it that way. He swallowed. Then why did he still do it? I let out a quiet breath. Sometimes people only know how to undo damage after they've already caused it. Adam nodded once, sharply, the gesture of someone who understood even though he hated that he did. Guests drifted past us, avoiding eye contact. A few offered awkward condolences as if Gerald had died on the dance floor. The bride Emily was still with her mother, face streaked from crying, but posture straight. Strength runs in families, I thought, but so does fear. "Dad," Adam said softly. Yes, son?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm sorry you were seated over there, near the kitchen. I didn't give the planner any instructions, but I should have checked." "It's all right," I said. "It's not." His voice cracked. "You're my father. I should have made sure you felt like part of all this." I looked at him then, not at the suit he'd been fitted for, or the future he felt pulled between, but at the boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long car rides, trusting I'd steer us home. "I don't need a seat at the front," I told him, "just a place in your life." Adam's eyes reddened. For a moment he seemed about to speak, then he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me. A full embrace, solid, unguarded. I felt his heartbeat. I felt years of distance loosen. "I want that too," he whispered. "I want you close, not because of money or the wedding or anything like that. Just because you're my dad." My throat tightened. I didn't trust myself to answer without it breaking. When he finally let go, the room was quieter. The chaos had thinned into something like aftermath, a space where choices could be made instead of reactions. "What happens with the will now?" Adam asked. "That's between you and Emily," I said, "and maybe her father when he's well enough." Adam nodded slowly. "I don't want money to decide our marriage." "Then don't let it," I said gently. "Not tonight. Not ever." He took a steadying breath. "Will you stay a while after everyone leaves?" I rubbed my thumb over my old wedding ring, an old habit, an old ache, but one that didn't sting quite the same way now. "Of course," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." Father and son stood together in the center of a reception hall littered with half-empty glasses and wilted flowers, the music cut off and the air still trembling with what had happened. But for the first time that night, I didn't feel like I was on the outside. I felt present. I felt necessary. And as the lights dimmed and the staff began quietly clearing tables, I realized something I hadn't let myself admit in years. Sometimes being seen doesn't require stepping into the spotlight. Sometimes it just requires stepping forward once, bravely, at the right moment. And tonight, at my son's wedding, I finally had.